Welcome to House Education. On oh, it's you, okay. May 27th, the committee is looking at H 542 as it passed the Senate and doing a bit of a side-by-side with what passed the House to understand the differences before moving on to a vote to concur. Not. Anyway, going to really just turn it right over to Legislative Council to walk us through the differences.
Good morning. It's still morning, I think. This is Mike O'Grady with Legislative Council. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what I'm going to show you the side-by-side of what has passed or what has been proposed by the Senate. You may recall that in your House passed bill, you stopped the requirement, ended the requirement for schools to test indoor air for presence of PCBs. You then looked at the fact that there were some schools that were currently in the process of testing or needing remediation, and you directed that any remaining funds be used to address those schools' needs. And if there were no funds available, then the requirement for them to go forward was paused until more funds were available. And then you required A&R to report back to you with a long-term plan for remediation, and then to send in an annual report effectively about how testing and remediation and investigation was ongoing and the status of it. The Senate Committee on Education did not like that proposal and has offered a substitute proposal. They, instead of ending the testing, the Senate Ed Committee proposed to move the deadline for testing to 2031, August of 2031. They also created a special fund for to provide grants to schools for investigation, remediation, and removal. However, there was no current revenue source for that special fund. So probably the most realistic revenue source for that fund would be an appropriation to the fund. The second would be that there is ongoing litigation by the state against PCB manufacturers, and any recovery that the state is awarded would be required to be deposited into that PCB special fund. In addition, there is ongoing litigation by individual schools against PCB manufacturers. And if that school gets a recovery in litigation and the school also had received a grant from the state for PCB investigation, remediation, et cetera, then the school would be required to reimburse the state for like the amount of the grant. So the school's not double winning. And then last, the Senate Ed proposal would have amended the school construction project language that isn't even in effect yet. It's going into effect in July, and that you enacted last year. You may recall that there's a preliminary assessment component of that. When you are applying for your school construction aid, you have to do these preliminary steps in order to qualify. And added to that preliminary list is that if you were a school pre-1980 and you were required to conduct PCB testing, you have to have completed that testing in order to go forward, in order to qualify for that school construction aid. Now that, as far as I know, currently that fund also doesn't have any money in it. So you still have the dynamic that you had when I was in here earlier this session, that there is no more money currently for the ongoing investigation mitigation and remediation of PCBs in school. The Senate was talking some about trying to make environmental contingency funds available. They were also talking about adding PCB testing as one of the contingency items in the big bill. You know, after everything's done, there's that waterfall that falls down to this money's available, and then you do this. The last I spoke with JFO, which was yesterday afternoon, on that question, they said that that's not part of the contingency list as of now. That was Senate Ed. When the bill went to Senate Finance, they took testimony from the Attorney General about the reality and the timing of litigation recovery and when that could happen. And they thought that 2031 was too ambitious and that it might actually require more time for that litigation to be resolved. So they pushed the date out to 2035. So there's still the requirement for schools to test for PCBs and indoor air quality, but the deadline will be 2035. Senate Finance's intent is that hopefully in that timeframe, there will be a reward or a settlement. And that reward or settlement, it's not pie in the skies. States are settling right now across the country, but their litigation has been in the pipeline for a while. And don't take these numbers for any prediction of what the state would be awarded, but Oregon just settled for $200 million. One of the Mid-Atlantic states, I can't remember, it was Maryland or New Jersey, did $70 million. And so there's real possibility of recovery, but it's going to take time. And they're probably going to have to also pay off some litigation costs if they do reach a settlement or awarded anything. So that will reduce the amount of the settlement as well.
But just out of curiosity, do any of those settlements have to do with indoor air, presence of PCBs in indoor?
It's the presence of PCBs in schools or public buildings.
In material or in the air?
It's material.
Okay.
But I mean,
Interesting.
the air testing is just
A symptom of the
Right.
of the materials. Yeah.
so that is what the Senate proposal is. It's moving away from ending testing, delaying testing till 2035, creating a special fund, at which point money could be put in it to provide grants and other assistance to schools to do investigation, remediation, and removal, including for those schools that voluntarily do it. Remember, from the very beginning, you were only funding schools and what had to be done underneath the requirement for testing and remediation. The special fund that the Senate's proposing would allow a school that's voluntarily engaged in PCB testing to get assistance. So you don't have to be part of the school construction project. You don't have to be looking for aid from the Capital Fund for Education. You just voluntarily do it. You can still apply to the special fund to get assistance. And then the Senate proposal would amend that school construction aid process to add to the preliminary assessment and requirement that you do PCB testing if you're a pre-1980 school.
Further questions? We have access to legislative council.
So this in essence only pauses testing until 2035. Once 2035 hits, we're back to where we are today, unless some future legislation does something different.
Right. I mean, the fund as it's set up, as I said, it does allow for that litigation recovery from both the state recovery and from the school, but it also allows for appropriations directly into that fund if perchance there is a good year or two where there's excess money. You could see, or an administration prioritizes completing the investigation and testing, you could see money put into that fund for financial assistance for schools.
Barring any of that happening between now and then. Barring no, let's say no money shows up. We're back to where we are right now in 2035.
Right, and where we are right now is I think I was in here earlier, there was about 3.9 that was left. There's now down to around 2.
That'll be gone.
And it's basically committed already.
Right.
And so there really isn't money for the ongoing program. And A&R is, I think, very honest about that. If you push out the date, they're slowing the program down because they don't have money. They do support pushing the deadline out and looking for other forms of money, which I believe they proposed to you earlier, but they don't have any money.
So I'll just tell everybody where I am on this, since it's been kind of my baby for a few years. The pushing out of the deadline is very important. That needs to happen. And so that leaves us in really a position of concurring with this in order to make sure that this deadline is pushed out. That's the most important thing to the schools. Frankly, as long as there's no money, it's all somewhat irrelevant. But I'm glad you came in to talk a little bit about that. If an appropriation were made, then testing could begin. So there is a public-facing testing schedule on the Agency of Natural Resources site, Department of Environmental Conservation site, that talks about here's the order we're going in. I have asked and asked and asked the department to update that list. That list was essentially created using science and looking at the buildings and the profiles. And then when it became clear that money was going to be tight, they sort of prioritized public schools and put at the bottom of the required testing all the private schools. And this is all schools. Doesn't need to be approved independent school or recognized, all of that. But anyway, so I've asked them to please redo that testing schedule as long as we're going to have a deadline. I've received no response to that. So I will just say, for those of you who are here next year and care about this issue, that is something that would be nice to see an update on. But anyway, I'll just say that for me, the deadline's the most important thing. That's the best we're going to get. That's the best we're going to get. As long as there's sort of like no money, much of it doesn't really matter. But where we were was a testing deadline of 2027. And that's that can't happen. So that's what needs to change. And we can all be optimistic about a settlement, and maybe it will get us to where we need to be. But anyway, so I would just, if anybody has any objection, I would ask that we just concur so we can get this baby out the door, signed, and extend that deadline out to 2035, which I think is I was very happy to see the Senate Finance Committee extend that. Thoughts? All right. Thank you, Michael. All those in favor of concurring in H542, raise your hand. I'm going to really check carefully this time. Does anybody disagree that everybody has voted?
10-01.
10-01. All right, great. Thank you. So just process-wise, this will come over from the Senate, and then whether it gets taken up sort of out of order is so it might just happen to get it off the books today.
I didn't hear if they had suspended rules to message it immediately.
Okay.
But I would not be surprised if they did.
Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
All right. So we have here, what we got left to talk about? That's PCBs. Miscellaneous ed. I thought we had one more thing that might come back to us.
I think that was it.
Okay. All right, well,